Tonight we're going to be talking about multiple subjects, primarily the approval of the ceasefire in Lebanon. What led Israel to accept a ceasefire in Lebanon? What are the details of this ceasefire? Why are we going ahead with the ceasefire? How was the Palestinian resistance involved? What's the link with Gaza? And what is anticipated further? And I'm going to answer all of your questions when it comes to these things to do with the ceasefire. And I also wanted to talk to you about NATO preparations against Russia, more tensions that indicate we could be potentially looking at a nuclear World War III. And what was the IDF chief of staff, the chief of staff of a criminal entity committing a genocide, doing in Britain for several hours yesterday? I'm going to start off with the ceasefire. That's the main thing here, and I'm sure many of you will have questions. But I will try and provide as much information as possible when it comes to the ceasefire. We had a declaration from Benjamin Netanyahu that he has accepted the ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu had a video that was approximately 9 minutes long, and I'm going to share a couple of details when it comes to his speech. And then I'm going to be talking about the reasons why they went ahead with the ceasefire. What does that mean when it comes to Hezbollah? And how was the Palestinian resistance involved in this ceasefire that's happening with Lebanon? So, Bibi Netanyahu had this. There we go. I'm going to share a couple of details from his video here.
אזרחי ישראל, הבטחתי לכם ניצחון ונשיג ניצחון. נשלים את חיסול החמאס, נשיב את כל חטופינו, נבטיח שעזה לא תהווה עוד איום על ישראל, ונחזיר את תושבי הצפון בבטחה לבתיהם. המלחמה לא תסתיים עד שנשיג את כל יעדיה, ובכלל זה עד שלא נשיב את תושבי הצפון בבטחה הביתה. ואני מבקש לומר לכם, זה יקרה בדיוק כפי שזה קרה בדרום. ידידיי תושבי הצפון, אני גאה בכם. אני גאה ביכולת העמידה שלכם, ואני מחויב לחלוטין לביטחונכם, לשיקום יישוביכם, לעתידכם. עד עכשיו, הודות לגבורת לוחמינו בצה"ל, בשב"כ, במוסד ובמשטרת ישראל, השגנו הישגים עצומים בשבע החזיתות של מלחמת התקומה. ההישגים הללו גורמים להשתאות והערצה בעולם כולו, והם מקרינים את עוצמת ישראל ברחבי המזרח התיכון. ראשית, בראש התמנון, באיראן. השמדנו חלקים ניכרים מההגנה האווירית שלה, מיכולת ייצור הטילים שלה, והשמדנו מרכיב משמעותי בתוכנית הגרעין שלה. אני נחוש לעשות כל מה שצריך כדי למנוע מאיראן להשיג נשק גרעיני. האיום הזה תמיד עומד בראש מעייניי, וזה נכון היום ביתר שאת, כששומעים את ההצהרות החוזרות ונשנות של מנהיגי איראן על כוונתם להצטייד בנשק גרעיני. עבורי, הסרת האיום הזה היא המשימה החשובה ביותר כדי להבטיח את קיומה ועתידה של מדינת ישראל. בעזה פירקנו את גדודי החמאס, הרגנו כ-20,000 מחבלים, חיסלנו את סינואר, חיסלנו את דף, חיסלנו את בכירי הארגון, והשבנו 154 מחטופינו. אנחנו מחויבים להשיב את כולם הביתה, את 101 החטופים שנותרו בעזה, החיים והחללים כאחד, להביא קץ לסבל הנורא של משפחותיהם, ואנחנו כמובן מחויבים להשלים את השמדת החמאס. ביהודה ושומרון אנחנו מחסלים מאות מחבלים. אנחנו משמידים תשתיות טרור ואנחנו פועלים בכל מעוזי הטרור. אין מקום שאנחנו לא מגיעים אליו. בתימן תקפנו בעוצמה את נמל חודדה של החות'ים, מה שלא עשתה הקואליציה הבינלאומית לפני כן. בעיראק בלמנו בהצלחה, אנחנו עדיין בולמים, התקפות רבות של כטב"מים, וגם כאן יש עוד אתגרים לפנינו. בסוריה אנחנו מסכלים בשיטתיות את הניסיונות של איראן, חיזבאללה והצבא הסורי להעביר חימושים ללבנון. אסד חייב להבין, הוא משחק באש, ועכשיו החזית השביעית, לבנון. חיזבאללה בחר לתקוף אותנו משם ב8 באוקטובר, חלפה שנה, זה כבר לא אותו חיזבאללה. החזרנו אותו עשרות שנים אחורה. חיסלנו את נסראללה, זה הציר של הציר. חיסלנו את כל בכירי הארגון, השמדנו את מרבית הטילים והרקטות שלו, חיסלנו אלפי מחבלים, והשמדנו את תשתיות התת-קרקע והטרור שסמוכות לגבולנו, תשתיות שנבנו במשך שנים.
He continues to get in a few more details, and one of the main things that I wanted to share with you is the fact that he based his ceasefire on 3 reasons. And it's approximately, let's see if it's here.
היו גם רבים שתקפנו בכל זה, אולי כדאי להתחיל להאמין. להאמין, 3 סיבות עיקריות.
Here we go. Why should we have a ceasefire now? Listen to this.
אז למה לעשות הפסקת אש עכשיו? יש 3 סיבות עיקריות. סיבה ראשונה, התמקדות באיום האיראני, ולא ארחיב על כך. סיבה שנייה, רענון כוחות וחידוש מלאים. ואני אומר לכם בגלוי, כי זה לא סוד. היו עיכובים גדולים בהספקת נשק וחימושים, והעיכוב הזה עומד להשתחרר בקרוב. נצטייד באמצעי לחימה מתקדמים שישמרו על חיי חיילינו ויתנו לנו כוח מחץ נוסף להשלים את משימותינו. וסיבה שלישית להפסקת אש, ניתוק הזירה ובידוד החמאס. מהיום השני של המלחמה, החמאס בנה על חיזבאללה שילחם לצידו. וכשחיזבאללה מחוץ לתמונה, החמאס נותר לבד.
These were the main things that I wanted to share with you when it comes to the reasons why he declared he had the ceasefire. Now, before this speech he had, Benjamin Netanyahu, to declare the ceasefire, he had a couple of meetings. During one of the initial meetings to accept this ceasefire, Hezbollah carried out the largest attack on Israel with 500 missiles. And at the time, Benjamin Netanyahu was fuming on the security establishment, telling them, where is the Iron Dome? Tel Aviv is being hit. We're under attack. We're being bombarded. And he accepted a ceasefire one day after. Then we had the declaration. It's about to get into effect, according to some reports, at 10 a.m. tomorrow. He also had meetings with the residents of the north. His aim, don't forget, he added an aim for the war, 3 aims relating to Gaza, 1 aim or 1 objective in relation to Lebanon. The objective of the war in relation to Lebanon, by Israeli confirmation, is getting the Israeli settlers back to the north. Will Benjamin Netanyahu be returning the residents back to the north? He won't. And I'll give you a bit more details about that. He won't for 60 days, whereas the Lebanese will be returning back to the areas even next to the borders with occupied Palestine. He had a meeting with the residents with the heads of councils of the northern settlements in Israel, in which everyone was shouting at Netanyahu. I posted a video yesterday that they published saying that Netanyahu is the main cause of bloodshed. You neglected us, you neglected the north. And fact of the matter is, he's not achieving the main objective for the next 60 days. And those 60 days are exceptionally important. And he's saying that the declared reasons, of course, primarily to focus on Iran and replenish the stocks, and according to him, making Hamas secluded. Although Hamas was involved in the negotiations when it comes to the ceasefire, alongside the PIJ, the two main resistance groups in Gaza, armed resistance groups in Gaza. Okay. We have a temporary ceasefire with Gaza. In Netanyahu's own words, the war hasn't ended. And that ceasefire does not include Syria, it does not include Iraq, it does not include Iran. And I'll get to Iran later on, and the statements coming from senior figures in the Iranian army talking about an Iranian response, regardless of what's happening in Iran. So no ceasefire with Yemen, no ceasefire with Iraq, no ceasefire with Syria, and no ceasefire with Iran, and no ceasefire with Gaza yet, but we have a ceasefire with Lebanon. And I will also elaborate further. If you remember, I told you a couple of months back when Netanyahu started to escalate against Lebanon, this could be his way down the ladder at one point, to have a massive escalation, then stop it, to have another ceasefire after that, shortly after that in Gaza, without all of the pressure and especially the resistance from within his cabinet, because most of them approved the ceasefire. And Ben-Gvir, who threatened to resign before from any ceasefire, he said, no, I'm not going to resign. So he has now more leverage on them. Well, you accepted a ceasefire in Lebanon, accept a ceasefire in Gaza. They were one of the main obstacles to reach a ceasefire in Gaza. Why? Because Netanyahu wanted to keep his coalition. Okay? He has a problem with the arms and he wants to focus on Iran. And he is secluding Hamas. Secluding Hamas, we already established that that's a massive lie. Focusing on Iran, well, you're already saying that you're opening 7 fronts. What do you mean focus on Iran? And then arms. With regards to arms, they might have a bit of a problem. However, all of these things are not the main things, by the way. The main things that are leading Benjamin Netanyahu to have a ceasefire are the levels of losses that are being inflicted by Hezbollah and the Lebanese resistance on Israel after they were annihilated already in Gaza. Tens of thousands of killed and wounded, PTSD, refusal. Back in March, IDF figures were begging the Orthodox leaders in Israel, saying we are in an existential threat, we are in a crisis. Back in March 2024, they were already saying we're in a crisis. Now imagine that crisis towards the end of 2024. Defeated army, killed and wounded, and they are Hezbollah bombarding central Israel. They're shutting it down. Okay, they have to. The arms thing is definitely there's something there, but the United States did not declare that they stopped arming Israel or anything of the sort. And of course, they suffered tremendous losses. Over 1,300 vehicles were targeted during this war, at least 1,200 of which from Gaza. Hezbollah declared that they destroyed 70 Merkavas. In Gaza, the numbers are tremendous, by the way. The biggest blows they received were from Gaza. But then he decided to escalate against Lebanon, again, potentially as a move to allow the problematic figures in his cabinet to later on accept a ceasefire in Gaza, because now they accepted a ceasefire in Lebanon. And polls in Israel are showing that over 61% of Israelis don't believe that Israel won against Hezbollah, and 66% believe that they should end the war with Gaza now. That's according to polls done yesterday by Channel 13 in Israel. Hezbollah, that's the main question. Hezbollah said we won't have a ceasefire before unless there is a ceasefire in Gaza, right? Of course. Everyone is asking, well, how comes you're having a ceasefire now with Israel and there is still no ceasefire in Gaza? Number one, both paths have been worked on simultaneously, together. Joe Biden just said, we have a ceasefire in Lebanon. There is work for a ceasefire in Gaza to be done. We have advanced progress from Egypt when it comes to a ceasefire in Gaza. And for the first time since the beginning of this war, an Egyptian delegation is going to be in Israel. Usually the delegations go to Egypt or they go to a third country to discuss the negotiations. Egyptian mediators being inside of Israel indicate that there is a big progress when it comes to Gaza. 3, Hezbollah are still fighting Israel without shooting one bullet. How? They are not allowing the residents of the north to go back for 60 days. That's internal pressure. That's internal pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, who is having a population raging at him, internal turmoil, disaster, chaos, havoc, and Hezbollah are sitting there when their residents can go back. The excuse of Netanyahu, oh, the security situation is still not prepared for you to go back to the north. That's, what do you mean? You have a ceasefire. And how comes the Lebanese can go back? You can't talk about destruction. Well, you destroyed all of the villages of Lebanon. Why are they going back and your residents are not going back when some of them want to? Some of them want to. Don't forget, the majority said we were not going back. Hell, millions left Israel so far. But those who are concerned with their homes and thinking about going back, the minority. Well, if they want to go back because they don't want to be in the hotels that you're sending them to, and if some of them, their houses haven't been destroyed, well, how comes they can't go back? That's something put from Hezbollah to have against Israel up until we have a ceasefire with Gaza. And clearly we have a ceasefire with Gaza. So that's number one for everyone trying to criticize the Lebanese resistance. When they're really not entitled to, by the way. These people are the people who sacrificed the most outside of Gaza for the sake of the Gazan people. With their Secretary General being assassinated, top figures assassinated, over 1 million fleeing their homes for the sake of Gaza. No one is entitled to say a word about the Lebanese resistance. However, we had negotiation. Hezbollah went to Hamas and the PIJ. They told them, Hamas, PIJ, there's a ceasefire agreement in Lebanon. What do you think about it? Do you think we should go ahead? Hezbollah said that. According to solid reports coming from Lebanon, with people who are dealing with the resistance fronts and politicians in Lebanon. Hezbollah consulted Hamas and the PIJ. This is the ceasefire. What did the Palestinian resistance tell them? We have faith in you that you have Gaza and Palestine in your hearts, similar, if not even more than what we have it. Imagine the level of trust between the two. And go ahead and we congratulate the ceasefire agreement. And this could be beneficial for Gaza. Why? Well, because Israel submitted to the will of the Lebanese resistance now. Where's all the talk of eliminating Hezbollah? 2 weeks ago, the new defense minister said one of the objectives is to disarm Hezbollah on live television. Where's disarming Hezbollah? Where's eliminating Hezbollah? Where's controlling all of the security? Where is the new face of the Middle East that Benjamin Netanyahu is talking about? It's all garbage. Nothing. The Lebanese resistance defeated Israel, and we are most likely on the way to get to a ceasefire inside of Gaza as well. However, in the meantime, Netanyahu can claim that he is secluding Hamas and the Palestinian resistance. Although, like we said, the Palestinian resistance was involved in the negotiations, and they themselves congratulate Hezbollah and told them, go ahead, we congratulate, good for a ceasefire for Lebanon, and we have faith in you. And like I said, the fact that Hezbollah are not allowing Netanyahu to achieve his objective of the war indicates that they dictated that condition. How can Netanyahu reach a ceasefire without achieving the objective of the war, returning the people back to the north? for 2 more months, that's a massive failure. Tell me about your objectives. Tell me, have you achieved them or not? If you've achieved them, success. If you haven't achieved them, failure. And Hezbollah insisted on that to prove that Israel failed. And again, they are applying pressure on Israel and supporting the Palestinians and supporting Gaza without firing a bullet through this ceasefire agreement that they're having with Israel. That's the first part, okay? Secondly, well, what about Iran? What about Yemen? What about Iraq? Well, there is no ceasefire agreement with them. So who are you secluding exactly, Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu? You're not secluding anyone, right? And we had another confirmation coming from the chief of staff of the Iranian armed forces. The chief of staff of the Iranian armed forces spoke again simultaneously with the report of the ceasefire. He vows the response will be beyond Israel's expectations. On the day of declaration of the ceasefire, Chief of Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces Major General Mohammad Hossein Baqiri warned the Zionist regime that it will receive an appropriate retaliatory response beyond imagination for its October 26th act of aggression against Iran. Comments in a meeting with senior Iranian military officials on Tuesday, Major General Baqiri said that the Israeli regime crossed Iran's red lines by launching an attack that resulted in the martyrdom of 4 Iranian air defense servicemen on October 26th. He said the Zionists know that Iran will give a different response at the appropriate time without hesitancy or haste, but with accuracy and prudence in such a way the aggressors will regret their action. The response to Israel's most recent act of aggression has been planned beyond the expectations of the Zionist regime's leaders, pointing out the operations True Promise 1 and 2 were distinct in terms of tactics, implementation, and types of weapons used. The Islamic Republic of Iran would never tolerate aggression against the soil and won't leave it unanswered. So you have a temporary ceasefire with Lebanon that is there for 2 months, 3 stages, and then we need a confirmation, and you still haven't achieved anything else. They will not see anything up until they have a ceasefire with Gaza, because all of the other fronts are open. And also the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu is also not sending the people back to the north could indicate that something might be happening in those areas. So instead of Hezbollah targeting them directly, tell them they're not going to return up until we have a total or a ceasefire, total ceasefire when it comes to Gaza, because that's why Hezbollah entered the battle from the beginning. Then we reach the global situation. Some countries, like Britain, think that it's suitable to have a war criminal committing genocide in their country during the genocide. Halevi flew to UK yesterday for a meeting with military chiefs. Herzi Halevi, the man monitoring, instructing the butchering of children, women, men, over 17,000 children, over 50,000 martyrs, thousands missing, over 100,000 wounded, destroying hospitals and mosques and churches and healthcare facilities and refugee shelters and tents. But Britain sees fit to invite him, because he's not on the list. He doesn't have an arrest warrant against him. IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, flew to Britain yesterday for a number of hours to meet with military chiefs from a number of nations. So they're not only inviting him, they're coordinating too, right? and he returned shortly after midnight. Israel Hayom outlet, which first reported the trip, notes that Halevi visit came against the background of the International Criminal Court arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, as well as an expected truce between Israel and Hezbollah. The outlet highlights that it is unusual, and indeed it is, for the military chief to travel abroad during wartime. That is, unless they're planning a military coup against Benjamin Netanyahu, which is again unlikely, and again doesn't take away from how complicit the British establishment is when it comes to this genocide. Inviting the chief of staff of a genocide war criminal entity to its soil to coordinate with him and with other people too. Which leads us to the NATO. It's as if the lunatic psychopaths in the world are only based in Western countries. The psychopaths pushing to get us to World War III and end human civilization. They allowed the genocide supporting comedian Zelensky to attack Russia with ballistic missiles, attack MS missiles sent by the United States. Now they're considering nukes. And we're seeing movements of tanks, armored vehicles through the Netherlands going east. And not only that, they are actually preparing for war. Ladies and gentlemen, they are preparing for war. And let me share this with you. NATO official urges businesses to prepare their supply chains for war. We're not just assuming now. It's not like assumptions. They're preparing businesses for war. Do you know what it means if NATO participates in a war with Russia? That means every NATO member state can be attacked with nuclear missiles. That's you, your family, your loved ones, everyone. Top NATO military officials telling businesses in the US and Europe to be ready for a wartime scenario. Dutch Admiral Rob Bauer, the head of the organization's military committee, told the European Policy Center this approach would be key to avoiding countries being vulnerable to Russia and China. What do you mean being vulnerable to Russia and China? You're the ones instigating this. I've been going around boardrooms, finance conferences, and even philanthropic institutions in Europe and America to persuade people to think about two questions. One, is my company or organization ready for war? And two, what can my company or organization do to prevent war? It's not about the company or organization. It's about the psychopathic people in charge. Companies and organizations are not pushing for World War III. You are. Is my organization ready for war? What do you mean if a nuclear bomb will land on an office complex? What kind of readiness? Oh, do you have a nuclear bunker under you? Is that their responsibility to have a nuclear bunker? Or the responsibility of the maniacs leading us to World War III? When the Ukrainian officials wanted to have a deal with Russia from the beginning of 2022, but were pushed by the US and the NATO to go and continue and we'll support you and killing millions of Ukrainians by now and leading us to this moment. Talk about international security, right? They talk to you about international security and, of course, feeding the military-industrial complex. And he has the audacity to warn against Russia and China. You are the ones poking them. You are the ones constantly in their necks. You are the ones positioning nuclear weapons next to these countries. What are they for exactly? Right? It's like your neighbor is aiming a tank at your house. What am I going to wave at him? No, why are you putting it? Get it away. And yet, they're asking businesses. Businesses need to be prepared for a wartime scenario and adjust their production and distribution lines accordingly. Because while it may be the military who wins battles, it's the economies that win wars. Wow. No, of course, the businesses are going to be well protected. You know, one nuclear bomb. What? Do you have anti-nuclear cream or something for them? What's going to happen? And I think the level of seriousness when it comes to what the NATO are doing now is being underplayed, by the way, in mainstream media, and how dangerous what it is that they're doing. And they know that what they're doing is dangerous. That's why the United States, by the way, has been delaying many things when it comes to handing Zelensky certain weapons against Russia, because they know they're going to be game changers and going to change the equation, and Russia would consider them red lines. Well, of course, they consider them red lines, and now they're showing you what they can do. And also, you're pushing the world for a nuclear war and putting your citizens first and foremost, your citizens at risk. For the sake of what? For the sake of the United States greedy corporations profiteering from these wars. So all of this is very dangerous. They're not just now talking in theory or, you know, solidarity. And no, these people are talking about direct confrontation between NATO and Russia, right? Well, why did you have all of these laws in place and strategies after World War II so that it doesn't get repeated? But I think the answer is, you know, it's quite simple. I think Western countries haven't faced a war for a very long time. They're generally detached. In general, they're detached and protected from wars they inflict on other nations abroad, to a level where it gave them a false sense of confidence that war will not reach our shores. Only for their arrogance and delusional levels to reach such a high level where they provoke a nuclear country, putting their citizens at risk. And if strategic weapons are used, and then they're going to use back at Russia, if they're going to use nukes, and they're going to nuke back, nuclear exchange, and you're asking organizations how are they going to be prepared? How are they going to be prepared? You should be the ones who don't lead your countries to a situation where they are on the brink of a nuclear war. You lunatic psychopaths. But again, when you're detached from your government's doing abroad this whole time, you know, become lax, and no, it's not going to come here, nor on our shores, or safe, we're protected. Up until you have leaders, you're complacent to a level where you have leaders, and then bring leaders again, by the way, who are warmongers and criminals, to a level where they attract war on your country. That has been, well, generally, when we're talking about European countries, safe from wars for 80 years approximately. And the United States, by the way, don't think that the United States is protected by oceans or something. No, they're not protected. The intercontinental ballistic missile, the United States doesn't have an answer to it. So if Russia wants to land it in the US, they will land it. Of course, they're going to have exchanges, and the US will respond, but you're not protected, you know? Don't think that the oceans are protecting you. It's not going to happen. So that's indeed dangerous. And in recent days, the NATO have been pushing more and more. It's as if they are in a rush to push all of the buttons for us to reach a nuclear war.